welcome back to our second podcast of the winter of 2020. And we are going to have 3 more, but joining us today is Keith Reed, who is the Payne County Horticulture Educator. So, Keith, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Casey.
How are you doing?
Good morning. It's a beautiful day. Sun was shining. It's cold this morning, but at least the sun's shining, so that's a win.
It's a nice day to be inside doing a podcast, right?
Yes, I'll agree with that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and joining us. And we want to welcome any visitors that are joining us online on Facebook. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to comment, and we will try to answer those as we go throughout the next hour. So, Keith, let's...
This is not a Stump the Educator hour, okay?
Let's
make that clear.
No pop quizzes
No
or
pop
anything?
quizzes.
We don't have any resources with
Softballs.
us here. Gotcha. Okay, well, I know we got a lot to talk about today, but I want to first kind of get into how you got into horticulture and tell us kind of a little bit of brief synopsis of your background and your experience with horticulture.
Oh, my. Career-wise, how far do you want to go back?
You know, as it relates to, you were kind of a turf guy, am I right?
I'll try to thumbs up or thumbs down if I'm missing the timeline window. But I stumbled into horticulture as a career. I actually, as a young person, found a job on a golf course, a very small, actually it was a 9-hole golf course in Shattuck, Oklahoma. And
in Shattuck?
In Shattuck, yes. And so I knew how to play golf, so I thought surely I must be qualified, you know. And anyway, I went to work at this little golf course and really enjoyed what I was doing. And just through a few circumstances, I discovered that people actually go to school to learn how to manage golf courses, and so that's what I did. I came to Oklahoma State in the mid '80s and got my bachelor's in turfgrass management and horticulture.
Okay.
And so then back into the golf course business for a few years. And just on a side note, if there are any golfers watching this, be very kind to your golf course superintendent. That is a very difficult profession, and
high stress management.
High stress job. It really is in a lot of ways. So anyway, be kind to if you haven't gotten your golf course superintendent and his or her staff anything for Christmas yet, add that to your list. They would appreciate it.
I bet.
And they would also be surprised by it, probably. So,
yeah.
It's kind of one of those behind the scenes roles. Anyway, I did that for a few years, and then I came to work for OSU managing the research component at the Botanic Garden, which is primarily turfgrass research. And so I did that for the majority of my career.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you have a long history with the Oklahoma Gardening Show because you were closely tied out there at what was used to be the OBGA, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're both dating ourselves now, but yes. And so gradually over the years, my interest began to shift. I actually can think back to several lighthearted conversations with some of the ambassadors we've had that they reformed me from being a turf major to a all-around horticulturalist. So that's a little bit of the background, and then I left that role and then came to the county office.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so now you went from behind the scenes management at a golf course to sort of behind the scenes management at a research station to now full on face to face with the public educator.
Exactly. And it's interesting looking back is if you would have gone to Keith Reed 20 years ago and said, how about if you be a county extension educator, I would have looked at you and laughed and turned and ran the other way. But my career is kind of, at least I hope it's prepared me well for my role. And so I'm like many folks in extension. I'm not an expert at any particular thing, but I do have a pretty good grasp on a lot of things. So
Yeah.
I hope that adds value to my role.
Well, I'm sure that real world experience too of actually managing and doing, you kind of know the problems that whether it's commercial or homeowners are actually facing, because you're a home gardener as well. You're very involved with your home garden,
Right.
and also within the community too. So before we leave your current position, tell me a little bit about how this year was with the pandemic, and just, did you see that there were a lot more people interested in home gardening? Because I know everybody was kind of stuck in their backyard.
So sure, I mean, you could just our viewers today have experienced this themselves. Trying to get some vegetable seeds by mid-April was, extremely difficult. So
I had to laugh. I want to interrupt you. I had to laugh because when at first the world shut down, it's like, there was no food on the shelves, but you would walk by and see all of these seeds, and I'm thinking, this is where you need to be going for your groceries, is to get the seeds.
That's right, and people did, and
Yeah.
so yes, it was March. Now it seems like last month, and it seems like a decade ago, right?
Absolutely, I felt the same thing.
But anyway, as all of us were trying to figure things out. Gardens and growing food and growing flowers and just getting outside became more important for people that were already doing it, but it became suddenly a whole new experience for a lot of people that were in search of something to do or were in some cases forced to do it. So absolutely. So
were they coming to you at the county office, and were you getting a lot of newbies or?
A lot of newbies. So a lot of questions related to raised beds and doing container gardens or wanting to build pop-up gardens, for lack of a better term. So yeah, we did a lot of client discussions on what's to do. I mean, there for a while, you could not buy, for example, bagged topsoil.
Right.
So people really were scrambling and had to improvise in some cases and go with what they did. So.
And fortunately, nurseries were identified as agriculture, and they are a part of agriculture. But because of that, they were able to stay open during the pandemic when a lot of other things had to close down. They were considered essential. So
absolutely, which is a great thing. And they were in the. This is one thing about this pandemic. It affects each of us as individuals somewhat differently, but we're all having to deal with stressors in ways that we've never had to deal with before, and the nurseries, were encountering that same thing.
Right, during the peak of what is their season.
Yeah, their season, and so now if they typically sell X flats of starter pepper plants. Now they're X times 10 and scrambling to try to get their hands on them.
Yeah.
So it was a chaotic time for everyone.
Yeah, well, I think we managed well. I think the industry managed well through it. And so anyway, I wanna get to a little bit about. Well, I want to remind our audience first, if you've got questions, feel free to add those onto Facebook. We've got somebody monitoring comments, and so we're happy to take those. If you have any questions for myself or Keith Reed. And if you are new to Extension, as far as you don't realize what the services are, people like Keith Reed are at county offices that are there to help anytime during the year. So whether it's wintertime and you're starting to plan your garden for next year, he's got answers for you. So obviously he's here in Payne County. So if you're in the Payne County area, that's who you would talk to, is Keith Reed. But if you're listening from across the state, contact your county extension office. And that information can be found on the OSU website under county extension. So anyway, we want to get to what you're doing nowadays.
I just want to say it can be found much easier now on the new and improved website than the good old days. So that's been a nice thing that's changed.
We do
this
have
year.
a new extension website, so
Yes.
we're excited about that.
Yes, we are.
So do we want to talk about your personal garden first? Let's come on. It's so neat.
You're running the show, Casey.
Okay, all right. Well, I have to brag a little bit about your personal garden, because you've shared it with our viewers on Oklahoma Gardening this summer. You did a couple of segments as we were in this shutdown and we couldn't film as normal at the Botanic Garden. You offered to do some segments for us, and so I like to say you are doing a good job of that shabby chic gardening, because it can be not done well, but I think you're doing it very well.
When I look back at that segment, just pro tip, including junk in the title of the segment is maybe not the best way to go, but it's descriptive and it's fair.
But I think so many gardeners are that, gardening on a dime, frugal gardener, and so right. I'm right there with you, Keith. I can't say that I've done it as well as you've done the shabby chic, So, but it ties in nicely with your bike fort that you have as well. You're very creative and crafty, and I mean that in an outdoorsy sort of a way. You're a builder, you're a constructor, and so you've always got ideas coming. So any ideas that you're working on right now that you want to share with us?
My little place is kind of how it's come to be is I enjoy having people arrive by bike, and so I've been fortunate to host a lot of people that are riding across the United States, or maybe even beyond that. So kind of my garden, if you will, kind of focuses on the idea that when people roll in from a day or a week or 2 months on their bicycle, they're a little bit surprised by what they see. So that's kind of my broad design guide. So working off of that, I'm subject to throwing anything out there.
You've got a lot of cedar poles. You've created a pizza oven out there. You've got a fire pit and kind of an arbor trellis. What do you call that octagon shaped thing? So it's really beautiful. It's very kind of relaxing and a welcome oasis, I'm sure, for bikers that come through.
So anyway, so the trellis, that's where I'm growing grapes on it. So you can be setting there if the weather's appropriate for a fire, or and if you happen to look up and it's the right season, you might can snack on a few grapes. So
very good.
So that's kind of the way to do it. But
with your garden, you've done the cold frames out of windows and things like that.
So I use old windows to make cold frames. I do, take advantage of I like to think of it as recycling, but I'm quite comfortable rummaging through a junk pile if that's what I need to do. If it's functional. If it's functional, why not? And
right.
And some of my things that I use are leftovers from other gardens, or maybe folks that have retired out of downsized from big gardens. I have some clay pots, for example, that mean the world to me because they were actually given to me by Ray Campbell. So I mean, who gets to say that? So so that's fun, but.
Ray Campbell's a legend with Oklahoma Gardening, one of the former hosts, and really one of the hosts that really kind of skyrocketed this into the next level, and just a legend within our department here in our university.
And was actually my professor for
was he?
Intro to Horticulture.
Okay.
So that dates both of us, if you will. But anyway, so that's always fun, and I like to be able to if I can, to tie a story with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so my home garden right now, the interest is in growing food that can be used on pizza, because actually you mentioned I do have a wood-fired pizza oven now, and so I take great pleasure in sending someone around back and harvesting some whatever, arugula or tomatoes or peppers, and then we'll chop it up and throw it on their pizza, and they're eating in 5 minutes. So,
and according to Kevin, arugula is the secret thing to add to pizza. So
it's if you've never tried it, and so done well. You cook your pizza, then you put the arugula on it, then you slide it back in the oven for 30 seconds and wilt it. So
Yeah.
a good wood-fired pizza oven. We're chasing a rabbit here, but you said it was informal. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
you know,
you've
it cooks about 800 degrees, so it doesn't take long for things to happen pretty quickly in a wood-fired
and
pizza
so you've
oven.
got people coming from all over the country that are exhausted riding miles and miles and miles on their bike, and they stop in at Keith's Bike Fort, and all of a sudden they're getting a fresh pizza. Not every time, I'm sure. But
all of a sudden might be overstated because it takes about 2.5 hours to get the oven
pizza going.
up to speed, but something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got that, and that's garden fresh. That's
That's
farm to
garden
table
fresh.
right there.
Yeah, that's go around back and harvest what you want.
That's
fresh.
awesome.
So,
That's
anyway.
awesome. Well, I'm sure that is a welcome and a nice note that you're leaving to those people that aren't from Oklahoma to realize that that's the hospitality that they get. So,
we say all of that to say that you ask about my next project. I'm just starting now to build a little hobby greenhouse.
Okay.
So which I have to laugh at myself because I've tried to talk, I don't know, maybe 500 people out of building their own greenhouse because you and I both know that
it's a lot of work.
Greenhouses are a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
But as these things go, I was gifted just enough junk windows to build a pretty nice sized greenhouse. So that's my next project.
Okay.
So, if things go well, maybe next summer we'll have the show back out and we can see how my greenhouse is doing.
Okay, so you're in the design stages of that?
Design stage, with me, design and construction is a...
Are you a field designer?
Yes.
Okay.
Field designer.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So not a paper designer. You're actually, let's put these windows together and see how they fit.
I have a few notes, but I'm very much adjust on the fly.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
anyway.
Gotcha. Very good. Well, we look forward to seeing that
Okay.
and learning from your experience. So let's transition into the kind of the bigger subject.
Okay.
I think it was like 2 years ago. Several of us in Extension had a meeting about just kind of developing more organic material and stuff.
Right.
Literature, demonstrations, research.
Yes.
We kind of covered it all. And it wasn't just people from horticulture, it was people from animal science. It was a lot of different members of the Extension world that came to that meeting.
Right.
And out of that meeting, we had people in the community here in Stillwater that were participants in that. And out of that, you ran away with some idea. And so let's get into that a little bit and how it's come to fruition at this point.
Okay. Well, so there were kind of two parallel things going at about the same time, and one is you just summarized it nicely. And then parallel to that, there was a new community initiative in Stillwater that what has become our Daily Bread Food and Resource Center, and which is a community. It's more than a food distribution center. It truly is a community resources for people in need, but it's focused around food, and so. As that initiative began to gain momentum, the idea of having a garden associated with it, makes perfect sense. And so I was involved in both of these initiatives. And then as an extension educator, one of the very common things that I encounter when I'm talking to clients is as they struggle with garden problems or garden issues, they are either they don't want to, or they're not comfortable with, or there are some other reasons, but they just don't want to use synthetic pesticides. And so, as you mentioned, OSU, we're doing a much better job getting that kind of information out now, but we're a little bit short. We're quite a bit short in having those. Organic options in a good package and handy to share with our clients.
And I think some of this information that we have isn't labeled organic because we know the word organic kind of ties with this whole legal thing of being certified organic and that sort of stuff. So we tend to use a lot of other practices like IPM that can be easily
IPM being integrated pest management.
Thank you. Yes, that can be easily integrated into an organic system and are important in an organic system. But maybe that information that we have available at OSU wasn't labeled organic.
Right.
So it was also trying to identify what resources we have that can fit into an organic system already.
Right. So for going back to those meetings we had, that's been a very important thing that has come out of that.
Yeah.
Is going through all of the resources OSU has at its disposal and configuring in such a way. Yes, we do have a lot of information. It's just a matter of getting it packaged appropriately so that we can then share it with the public.
Right. And also, I mean, like with anything with information, it's being able to access that in a timely manner because there is so much information.
That's everything. So we're going back just a few years now, but things kind of began to gel a little bit in the fall of 2018. I would say we broke ground on a garden, but we didn't actually break the ground. What we did is took a low maintenance bermudagrass lawn, and we put a bunch of cardboard down and a bunch of hay straw and mulch, and walked away from it until the spring of 2019, and then we began to build out a garden.
So instead of tilling, you piled up on top of it. You started building that soil on top with cardboard and material.
Right. And so, do we have a question?
We have pictures though.
We have pictures.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So I think it's photograph 8.
Is it? Okay.
So that is a shot of the garden that was taken late this summer, and
it's beautiful.
And so that's 2 years of work, and so anyway, let's go back to the timeline a little bit because that's the best way to approach it.
So you just let it set all winter. So right now, if people are wanting to build a garden, put cardboard, put mulch.
It's a great time. So one of the first things that was exciting going into the very early spring of 2019 is we started going out, and it was February, but start pulling some of that old and rotting, as you well know, the cardboard was rotting, but we were already starting to see changes on the surface where the earthworm and insect activity was starting to work. So we had a nice friable surface under the mulch. But early spring 2019, we made some informal raised beds, and we planted some vegetables, and we were off to the races. And so 2019 became our test case, if you will. Is this a viable project? Is this a good use of volunteer resources? Our Daily Bread it's been wildly successful, but it takes a tremendous team of volunteers and staff to make it happen. So is the garden adding value to Our Daily Bread, or is it actually pulling away volunteer time that need to be doing something more important? But everybody, executive director, the staff, and especially the board of Our Daily Bread felt very strongly that it was an asset to the garden or to the organization. And so late summer 2019, we decided to go ahead and build it out a little more formal. And you see the raised beds, we used cinder blocks construction there, and developed it out, and then we get to February of 2020, and little did we know in February how much the world is going to change. But by March, it was very clear that things were going to be different, and so we made a quick decision to go ahead and expand the garden. So now we have about 1/4 of an acre. So, you know, if you're not familiar with land measurement numbers, 1/4 acre sounds like not a very big garden. but that's 14,000 acres, or 13,000 square feet is exactly the size of our garden. And when you're out there with a hoe, suddenly 13,000 square feet is a pretty good sized garden.
Right.
So that's where we're at today.
And going back, let's keep in mind you've done organic practices in this, and you are battling Bermuda grass, so that's probably the biggest discussion point.
So we have so now, another thing that happened in 2020 is, so in 2019 I was more of an advisory role, so I would give the volunteers instructions and directions and on what needed to be done that particular day. And then when the pandemic hit, and my formal programming was compromised, so that I'm no longer going and speaking to a group of 20 to 25 people. I started spending a lot of my time physically in the garden, doing much of the garden task, and then also through my connections, I began to invite get clients of mine that had gardening questions just to come directly to the garden. So we're speaking outside, we're communicating outside, so everybody's more comfortable doing that.
So you really used it as a venue to socially distance rather than
really
coming into the extension office.
It really worked well for that component. But anyway, that gave me some very solid numbers, what it's going to take. So now, for example, if you come to me and say, I want to get rid of Bermuda grass to have a garden, but I don't want to use Roundup or glyphosate, what do? I can say, well, yes, it can be done.
Yeah.
But just to give you a ballpark example, we now have about 1/2 of a volunteer hour for every square foot of that 13,000 foot garden dedicated just to Bermuda grass control.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So hand grenade math here. So, but like 1,000 volunteer hours have gone into getting the Bermuda grass under control in the garden.
And that's just getting it under control. It's not gone, which means if you give it a break, it's going to resurge.
You're exactly right, and that's the most important point that we need to drive home when it comes to Bermuda grass management, and because that's the primary point of failure, folks. And it doesn't matter what method they're using, and that can be smothering it, use cloth, or adding soil, or herbicides.
It's always gonna come back on you a little bit, and when it comes back, you hit it when it's weak. You don't let it get established enough, because as soon as those green leaves and green shoots break the ground again, it immediately begins to restoring those depleted energy reserves inside the plant. And then, you go on vacation, back when we had vacations, or you go work in another part of the lawn for a couple of weeks, and then boom, you've lost it all. So is your garden, I can see that you have a lot of raised beds. Is it primarily raised beds, or let's talk about the percentage of raised beds to in-ground. Do you half and half?
So it's all raised beds, but it's about 2/3 of the garden is the cinder block raised beds, and then the remaining third is just mounded
soil,
mounded raised bed. But so in between those, we use we have several layers of cardboard. So one of the really another reason, I should say, that I was excited about the prospect of this garden at Our Daily Bread is because it is as close to a complete in-house operation as you can have. So not only do we grow food for the clients, but we have cardboard boxes coming in by literally the truckload. We have food waste, so food that comes in that is spoiled before we can put it in someone else's hand. It's compost. I mean,
so it's a cycle.
So it's cyclical, and so we're working to improve on that. We'll talk about the composting operation a little bit later, but so we're certainly not a closed system, but we're much more of a closed system than what is practical for most gardens. So we have several layers of cardboard, and then wood chips. We have local arborists that supply wood chips, and so that is the walking surface and the pathway surface for the majority of the garden, which is fantastic. If we think back to 2019, and we had the historic rainfall, and that was a brand new garden. Had we not had the wood chip paths so that we could get in the garden and work, we probably would have lost the garden to bermudagrass that first year, because I don't think we would have been able to get in and out of there regularly enough to keep it under control.
So how thick are you putting all that down?
The cardboard?
Yeah, the cardboard, the mulch. So
we like to have at least 2 layers of cardboard, and as you've talked about when you're doing the work at the Perkins Research at Cimarron Valley Research Station, overlapping it is critical.
Right, it's those gaps.
It's those gaps. So the Bermuda, it crawls in and goes around, and so the more you have to think of. You're going to think I'm a wacko, but it really helps when you're doing this if you think about this from the perspective that the Bermuda grass can think, because when you
become one with the grass.
Exactly, because it's going to search around under that cardboard, and it can run for feet until it spots an opening, and then it shoots up, and there you go. So our most successful method, now we've done some solarization, and we've done some sorghum Sudan smothering work, which maybe we'll get to, but our most successful management tool has been when we see a little bit of Bermuda grass breaking through, we'll hoe that off, keep that hoed off. But then if we get a significant break, we just rake the wood chips out of the way. We rake the rotting cardboard out of the way, and we physically either hoe or just hand pull all the Bermuda we can see, and then we put fresh cardboard down, we put fresh wood chips down, and we repeat the process.
Okay. So keep taking it away from, being able to access sunlight and that sort of stuff to deplete it from photosynthesis.
Right. So. It's a battle, and you just have to, you have to wear it down.
Right. Before it wears you down,
Before it wears you down.
So how many volunteers do you guys have now? And I know you've got people from all over the community. You've got student interns helping there, from retirees. So
and that's something that's also changed. The first year when we were establishing it, we were working with big groups, volunteer groups. We had 20, 25, 30 people out at one time. I mentioned 1,000 volunteer hours. A lot of those hours were accumulated because we were taking a shovel full of Bermuda grass sod and throwing it on a screen and physically going through it to pull all of the rhizomes out to get those first raised beds constructed. So is that practical for you as a homeowner?
Yeah.
That's for you to say, not me. But
have you had any volunteers saying, "What are we doing here? What are we looking for? Gold?"
It was quite enlightening to me. As someone that's done plants for all of my adult life, I take things for granted, and so I'm not kidding you. It was kind of cool to see college students
willing to
find a millipede for their first time, or June bugs. We had white grubs were going home by the dozens to feed pet turtles, and so that it's been fun. But yes, so this year, even the volunteer effort looked a lot different. We had to be careful and cognizant of the fact that we didn't want big groups out in the garden. So we kind of transitioned to a smaller smaller groups or even individuals, once they're trained, then they can come and go and work in the garden as needed.
Very good.
And so, that touches on an important point, that if you're interested in the idea of a community garden and want to make it happen in your community, gardening doesn't always lend itself to big groups coming in every 2 weeks for a big work day. There's a time and a place for that. But to be successful, as you know, and as many of our viewers know, you need to be in that garden every day or every other day. So
I know that was one of the, you mentioned that having big groups, and that was one thing that we would deal with at the Myriad Gardens when I worked there. It was like, you'd have these corporate volunteer days, and so all of a sudden you'd have this flood of 20 and no offense, but lack of experienced volunteers, and so you would find mulch or maybe bulb planting or something for them to do, but even that, there's a level of knowledge that you need to know, and so we would have to train those volunteers. But having that massive of a group to keep the integrity of what you're trying to do is sometimes difficult. So
that's right. And so integrity is a good term, because the primary goal of this community garden is to produce as much food as we possibly can for the clients of Our Daily Bread. And our model is if you're a client, or for that matter, if you're hungry, you just come and go in the garden. If you need it, you harvest it and take it and eat it. So we each community garden has a different model, and what works well for one group may not work for another group. But the model that we've chosen to work from, and it's working pretty well for us, is just come out, and if you need it, take it. And then on times when Our Daily Bread is open for food distribution, then we're careful. For the most part, we have someone, if not myself, then someone else that has a good level of experience in the garden out helping people, show them how to harvest. For example, lettuce is a good example. You don't, leaf lettuce, you don't just pull the whole plant out, but you just break the leaves off so it'll continue to produce.
Right. So do you guys have cool season crops growing out there right now?
We do. We covered. We use low tunnel, so season extension techniques.
Okay.
And so we've got the poly spun fabric that we're using to cover the crops as needed. And so we've covered. Right now is the third time we've covered, but we covered last Thursday, I believe. So it's been covered 4 days now. I don't know what we'll have after these 18-degree temperatures. I haven't looked yet. But a week ago, which was the first week of December, people were taking sackfuls of produce, primarily greens, home. But we had broccoli and a few Brussels sprouts and some beets and turnips home. So, yes, we're still up and going. So.
Excellent. So we want to plug the Our Daily Bread website. If somebody wants to be a volunteer, how do they get involved in this if they're here in the community? And
so yes, you just go to Our Daily Bread. Okay.
Kevin's got it. Kevin's got up there. Yeah.
Okay. So. Great. So you go to the website and do spend some time reading what Our Daily Bread is all about, because it's a fantastic organization, but they have very high standards for client interactions, and so you need to be on board with that.
You guys you have to buy into the mission of what Our Daily Bread is.
Absolutely. Right? And then the way we're handling things is you'll see some opportunities to volunteer for the food distribution, but the way we've got it set up at the moment is then they'll just kick you to me via email, and we'll work together to set up a time.
Okay.
And then after the first of the year, we actually have a horticulture intern coming in that will be our garden manager for this next year. So you'll work more directly with our garden manager, which we're very excited about.
Yeah.
You know, it's a great opportunity to be able to let horticulture students or other students have some hands-on experience with not only growing vegetables in a community gardening setting, but as you know, working with volunteers, you've already touched on the challenge there. So
yeah, so if somebody wanted to volunteer, they could just get a hold of you directly at the Payne County Extension Office?
Payne County Extension, yes.
Okay.
By email is always a good way to do that.
Okay,
so.
and or check out your website as well there at the Extension Office. And,
yes.
Excellent. So we've got interns involved out there at Our Daily Bread. You touched on some of the other methods with the sorghum Sudan that you were doing cover crop, and also let's get into the composting. So whichever one you want to go to first. If
So,
we've got
so the sorghum Sudan as a shade. So let me just share our experience. So we did have an area that in very early 2020 we had some plastic over it. So we were doing some short-term solarization just to kind of get started on this expansion idea. And so when the soil temperatures came up, we wanted to try the sorghum Sudan as you were doing there at Cimarron Valley. And so we planted it, and we got tremendous growth. And
did you cut your pack or you let it go tall?
So we did both. We tried to let some grow, and then we kept some cut back. As we kept cutting it back, then I used that to feed the composting operation. So we were growing our own greens for the composting, which was an advantage. But just quite frankly, it was, can I say, difficult to manage. Because there is a fine line with, as you know, sorghum Sudan. After the vegetative growth slows, so it shoots up, and then it's pretty soft and pliable for just a little bit, and then that stem starts getting woody.
It turns into like sugar cane.
And when it starts getting woody, if you don't have it cut, it's a hassle. And so we were out there with starting out using a weed eater and trying to keep it cut down, and then finally we invested in a battery operated electric hedge pruner, which we only have two mechanized tools at this community garden. We have a rototiller, and then we also have these cordless hedge pruners. And gosh, I'm a huge fan. So you can, if it's sorghum Sudan we're talking about, you can start at the top and you can chop that and work your way down and cut it into pieces that can be worked back into the soil or to go into the composting operation or whatever.
Right.
Whereas if you chop a 7-8 foot piece of sorghum down at the base, what are you going to do with it? You don't hit it with a rototiller. So
you've got corn stalks.
Exactly. Basically. So if you're a gardener and you have access to larger equipment, maybe you can bring a brush hog or a really big tractor operated tiller, or even better if you can bring livestock in and break that sorghum Sudan down, then it probably it has its role in shading the Bermuda grass out. Once again, not to kill it, but to weaken it so that then you have a better shot at it. But frankly, it just wasn't the right tool for our mission.
And we chose it because it's such an aggressive, drought-tolerant grower, and so it's something you don't need to irrigate, because you irrigate true. Bermuda grass, that's going to really appreciate that too. And so it was this idea of we could grow a cover crop and hopefully shade out the Bermuda grass.
Right.
Is that
and so that's why we did it. So yes, and so 2020 it was dry, and we used a sprinkler to get it germinated. And so our method was we had this former Bermuda grass lawn that had plastic over it for not long enough to fully solarize it, but enough to weaken the Bermuda. So we removed the plastic, went over it with a rototiller, not enough to turn it up fine, but enough to break the turf up a little bit. and then just broadcast the sorghum Sudan in it, hit it again with the tiller, and irrigated it one time, and it was off to the races.
Have you done any winter tillage, trying to expose those rhizomes to the freeze and stuff?
We have not done.
Okay.
Of course, we don't need to do that this year, but we did it a little bit last year.
Okay.
And the thing about that is you never know for certain if you're successful or not,
Right,
because it's only after the winter that you know if you're going to have any Bermuda grass winter kill.
Right.
2 weeks ago we still had green Bermuda grass, so had we known that we were going to go from green Bermuda grass to 18 degrees, that would have been the ideal time to turn that Bermuda grass over and expose those rhizomes and sprigs.
Right. Sometimes our winters are 2 miles. So.
Many times they are 2 miles.
So let's go into some of the other cover crop practices you've done. I know we did a segment on this in Oklahoma gardening, and so I think you've done some other techniques of how you've incorporated, and then I believe even the stamping method where you just kind of broke down the cover crops.
So we've.
My term might be off on that. I'm not sure what that's called.
That is crimping.
Crimping, thank you.
So crimping is something we've looked at. It's helpful. I think the take-home message is
a lot of labor.
I don't care. It doesn't matter. I don't want to say I don't care, because that's the wrong message. But it's not as important as to where you get your information is that you experiment with it for yourself, because what you see
what works in one is not necessarily going to work in the other situation.
Exactly. And so I was the message was delivered beautifully. If many of our viewers probably received their new Seed Savers catalog within the last couple days, and if that's you, just flip open a couple pages to kind of their introductory remarks, and they have a beautiful summary about what really makes a successful garden, and that's back to the idea of being in the garden regularly, observing what's going on. And so back to the cover crop idea is you're going to learn. You have to manage cover crops on the fly. You can't do your cover cropping plan exactly by a calendar date or something, because for example, you don't want it to go to seed.
Right.
So your information may say, well, in February 23rd you need to crimp it and then turn it under, or whatever you're going to, or interplant, whatever you're going to do with it. But if it starts seeding out first week of February after we've had a warm spell, then that's what you need to do. And
that's why on a lot of our information you see time periods, from March to April or something, because we don't know when spring's going to show up necessarily. So
and then just overall, cover crops are a critical piece of what we're doing, because it is an organic garden, and organic gardens are at their core, they're all about the soil. Mm-hmm. As we know, we get the soil right, and the plants are the easy part. So we were fortunate when this garden began that we had, at least for Payne County and for Stillwater, we had a surprisingly good site as far as decent quality topsoil.
Flat.
Grade was right. We had a good A layer there or organic layer, because it had been a low maintenance Bermuda lawn for decades, and so it had a lot of weeds in it, perennial weeds. So there was some structure actually to the soil, but it's not as good as it can be. So we absolutely need to be constantly adding organic matter to it, and so
which essentially organic matter is, I kind of relate it to sponges that you're putting in the soil. It's what's going to allow the water to infiltrate into the soil faster rather than just running off. It's going to hold that moisture, making it more available to the plants later on through droughts, and also adding that nutrients. It's going to add that nutrients capacity to it. So.
Exactly, and so the raised beds with the cinder blocks. So we tried to take we've incorporated all of the topsoil that we had on the site, but we were still short to get these cinder block beds raised up. So we had to purchase. We ended up with one 10-yard dump truck full of topsoil. Well, for us, what you can get locally and is sold as topsoil in bulk is very sandy. It's actually from the banks of the Cimarron River. So
it's the soil that was on top wherever they
exactly.
got it
So
from.
it's effectively it's kind of dirty sand, So it's what that means is water will move through it too quickly, and
there's
nutrients,
very little organic matter.
There's virtually none, and nutrients will move through it too quickly, and so whereas if you're cover cropping a clay soil, the idea is let's take a turnip or a radish, that cover crop goes down in there. It creates a void when you cut the top off of that root or that tuber, and then it begins to deteriorate. It creates that void for water and
which
roots.
Essentially is aeration.
Aeration, yes. So for a sandy soil like we have, then it creates that sponge. So that's the wonderful thing about compost and about cover crops is no matter the type of soil you have, it's a critically important garden component.
Rebecca Chavez wants to tell you that you're doing a great job out there. So
thank you, Rebecca.
Or today, you're doing a good job as well on the podcast. But anyway, let's talk a little bit further. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. And again, if anybody else has other questions, feel free to comment. We've got about 8 more minutes left, I believe.
Okay.
So, or we can continue to go forever if it's still cold outside. So, let's talk a little bit about the composting. So you've been continuing to add that compost. So you have a separate site where you're actually doing compost from rotten food that's coming back from our daily bread, scraps that are coming out of the garden. You're doing a composting system over to the side. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And so, and that's been there's been several steps to our composting operation. So we began with the classic pallet composting system. And so the idea of a great compost bin for a homeowner or for anyone is just take 4 or 5 pallets and make a box. You can wire them together or nail them together, whatever, because that's about the right size for a compost pile. It's big enough that you can actually have some good composting taking place, but it's small enough that most people can turn it, without completely exhausting themselves. And then another thing is back to the idea of our daily bread is, pretty good at being a cycle. Pallets come in by the dozens and dozens, so we have a lot of pallets. So our first composting system was just a group of pallets that side by side, and so we fill up one box and we would leave a blank spot to turn. When it gets full and it's time to turn it, instead of trying to turn it in place, we would just fork it over to the empty box, and that turns it. So that was plan A. It was functional, but think back to where we're at now. We're at a site with a lot of volunteers. A lot of volunteers are repeats, but we also get a lot of volunteers that are brand new. So maybe they're there for one time. But I don't know if your viewer can see it, but in that first image there, and maybe this goes back to my home roots, but a pallet system can be a little tacky, borderline.
Too shabby for your chicness?
It can look like a trash pile if you're not careful. Let's call it what it is. And so we were finding that we were not getting really good cooperation with. There was too much plastic and other waste that were going into the compost piles because of frankly, it kind of looked like a trash pile. So that was a little bit problematic. It was also problematic for some of our volunteers to take a pallet and pick it up and move it. It's a little bit heavy. It's a little bit awkward. And then also, we were shocked by the volume. You know, you're composting and you're going along pretty good, and then all of a sudden you get 20 crates of bananas that are rotten, and you need to compost them immediately. That's a lot
compost in itself. I mean, that's a big pile.
Exactly. And so kind of as an addition to that, we were kind of scrambling, and so we just did some above ground trench composting. And so we just took some cattle panels and put them on the ground, and then we held them in place by taking some wooden sawhorses and set them down over the top of them, and then so we started doing bulk composting using all of this excess food waste with wood chips.
Okay.
And so that kind of helped us get started.
So do you turn that?
So
or?
We didn't. We just let that do its thing. And as most of our viewers know, wood chips are not the ideal brown for composting. They're just too slow to break down. Mm-hmm. And so that got the composting process started, but that was not really very effective. I can't recommend using wood chips for a home composting operation unless you are absolutely going to pile it and forget it mm-hmm. for a long time.
Right.
As you know. But so after that, and at about that time, there were some other things happening that we needed to move the composting operation anyway. So we recreated the pallet idea, except instead of pallets, we used short sections of cattle panel. And I'm very pleased with that for constructing a compost bin. The cattle panels, they work well. They're easy to manage. You can just wire them together. You can cut them to any size you want. That is a great way to build a compost bin. Typical cattle panel is 16 foot long, so you can cut it into 4 sections, and boom, there's your composting operation. So that's a great tool for a homeowner to try. Where I chose to locate that compost operation is a story that it doesn't make me look particularly good, but I'm willing to throw myself out there because it's going to save a gardener a lot of problems.
Okay.
But it was immediately adjacent to our planting areas. So 4 foot from the edge of one of the raised beds, that's where the composting operation began. And on the one,
so that it's convenient to access.
It's very convenient. It's very convenient. And on the one hand, the pollinators just loved it. Back to the bananas, you have a whole bin full of bananas that are 3 days old.
I can't imagine the butterflies.
The butterflies and the bees and all manner of pollinators are all over it.
I bet.
But also it was a problem for rodents. On the back side of our garden, there happens to be a low maintenance utility area that has a collection of junk by any standard, not just my standard, by any standard. And then there's a chain link fence, and so that area is kind of it's a safe haven for rodents and other wildlife.
And you created a grocery store for them too.
We absolutely did. And so what contributed to that is we put a pallet on the bottom of each of these to help with aeration and airflow. And gosh, the rodents just we had
really appreciated that.
That was home sweet home. And so, and then that was becoming a problem. They were just too close to the garden, mm-hmm. So right over this winter, we're actually moving our composting operation yet again. So it's going to be still on the property. It's not quite as convenient, but it's what needed to be done to help with our rodents. And so once again, I love this idea of using the cattle panels. I moved away from the pallet on the ground for two reasons. Once we didn't have a problem with it drying out, we had a problem with it being too dry. So by having your compost in contact with the soil, that's going to help manage our moisture a little bit. But that's been our experience with compost bins.
That's excellent. And so your building material of choice is stock panels versus pallets.
Right. So stock panels and a few T-post will make just a fantastic composting operation. And you can make it any size you want. You can add as many bins as you want. We just keep adding bins, and if we get a big load of material in, we just add a couple more bins.
That's great.
And so that works.
Well, I want to again remind our visitors and our listeners about Our Daily Bread's website, and also the Payne County Extension Office website. If anybody's interested in participating as a volunteer or has questions about the situation or their home garden, Keith Reed is always available as the horticulture educator. And it looks like Laura Payne is joining us via her remote location. And she said horse fence is smaller than cattle panel. So just a note to any other listeners that there are different types. Often we refer to cattle panel as a generic term, but there actually are different types of livestock fencing and paneling.
That is exactly right, and thanks, Laura, for bringing that up, because what we're using for the composting component, the squares are welded on a 2-inch by 4-inch.
Okay.
So you'll get a few vegetable food scraps that can get outside of that. But the 4x4 spacing, a rotten apple or orange just goes right through that.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't know whether it's hog paneling, but there are actually some that have smaller spacing at the bottom versus the top.
There are, and then if you already have some on hand, but maybe they're too big, all you do is just stick some cardboard inside there. And then that helps hold it in, and then the cardboard will break down a little bit. So that's fine.
Very good.
Too. So
a big thing is to look around you, what resources you have available. If you have windows, make a greenhouse. If you have cardboard, make soil. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As we wrap up, any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us about your either personal or professional experience in gardening?
A critical part of my horticulture education to citizens of Payne County is expanded through the Master Gardener program, Payne County Master Gardeners, and unfortunately, all of our Master Gardener outreach it's very hands-on and one-on-one and in group settings, and so. That has kind of been on hold through COVID, and so we're looking forward to getting that going when it's safe to do so. But we're not quite prepared to do that. But if being a master gardener is something that interests you, I'd love to talk to you about that and what a master gardener actually does and what the training involves. But that will come. Once again, when it's safe to do that.
So people, if they're interested, they could probably contact you with their information so that when that opens up, you would be happy to put them on a list or something.
Right, sure. Right. Historically, Payne County offers new Master Gardener training January through April. Well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
We're not going to do that. First of all, while it's technically possible.
And some counties are.
Yes.
So again, if you're listening, check with your local county to find out if they have adjusted some way. It's really on a case-by-case situation.
Absolutely, case-by-case. But for our group, we're all, I think, suffering from Zoom fatigue or online education, and so we're just going to hold off until we can safely resume face-to-face training. Now, we don't have this on the schedule yet, but perhaps we might look at doing a fall Master Gardener session. So we'll wait and see. But yeah, you're right. Each county is different. Each county has different resources, different people group, and so each county Master Gardener program is a reflection of the interest of that particular county. So we are not all carbon copies of each other.
Right. Which makes them so unique and so interesting. So.
Yes.
All right, well, Keith, thank you for joining us. And I want to remind our listeners, we've done a lot of different segments with you over this past summer and in previous years. So I'm sure we probably have posted some of those in the comments of cover crops and things like that. And we look forward to a greenhouse window segment this summer. So we'll see what comes out of that.
I guess I committed myself, didn't I?
You did. Well, you got to have something to show us.
Exactly.
Thank you, Keith. It's always a pleasure. And
Thanks,
we appreciate
Casey.
you
I
stopping
enjoyed
by.
it.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.